What happens when a spirited artist turns her garden into a battlefield against the HOA? Brace yourself for chaos, unexpected allies, and the wildest farmer's market Maple Crest has ever seen. Dawn broke, sending a golden light over the manicured lawns and pastel-hued houses of Maple Crest. I squinted, rubbing sleep out of my eyes, only to stumble straight into the front page of my unasked-for nightmare. My lovely lawn, usually a sanctuary of vibrant petals and herbs, was now a designated parking lot for a farmer's market that I never consented to. There they were, tents being set up like an impromptu carnival of fruits and veggies, all while I stood as the unwilling host of these kale-selling intruders. This was the HOA's idea of community, I suppose, inviting strangers to crawl over my carefully nurtured flowers to hawk tomatoes like they were diamonds on the black market. What absolute nonsense. I wasn't just outraged, I was laughing so hard inside at the sheer absurdity of it all. Would I have to charge them rent next? I threw on my favorite flowy dress, which just so happened to have a rebellious flair that mirrored my attitude about the HOA. As the delightful chorus of misplaced optimism rang through the air, I marched out to confront the smug Karen Hargrove, the self-proclaimed empress of our cul-de-sac. "Good morning, Megan. Beautiful day for a market, don't you think?" She beamed, her perfectly coiffed hair glowing like the sun, completely oblivious to the mini-storm brewing behind my eyes. The audacity. It's like she was offering me lemonade after breaking into my house. I mustered up a smile, my inside boiling with indignation. "Lovely day indeed, Karen. It's just that I didn't realize my front yard would serve as booth central for your veggie palooza," I retorted, armed with sarcasm like it was a steel sword. While her expression twisted in confusion, I realized she wasn't the only one caught in this grapevine of chaos. Enter Terry Jung, the warm-hearted, plaid-shirted handyman. Bouncing onto the scene as if he were a low-budget superhero, Terry gave me the merry thumbs up, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "They put the market where?" he chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. In that moment, I found a comrade in my latest crusade against the HOA oppression. We exchanged conspiratorial glances, knowing what had to be done. Poison ivy. Planting that pesky plant at each booth spot was a risk I was more than willing to take. I envisioned the kale enthusiasts caught mid-sell, only to realize they'd unknowingly set up in a veritable green hell. "Let's turn their farmer's market into a poison dream," I said, knowing I must rally my energies to wreak delicious, if hazardous, revenge. So, with dramatic flair akin to a notorious villain revealing their master plan, I set out to procure as many poison ivy seeds as I could. Each seed felt like a tiny little vial of rebellion, my botanical strike against the tyrannical HOA. And I should clarify, you don't just plant poison ivy casually and hope it shows up exactly where you want it. No, you must methodically place those little devils in a combat formation, scattered throughout every booth spot as if I were a general managing a vegetable battlefield. My heart raced with anticipation. Scenarios unfolded in my mind where unsuspecting vendors would set up their carefully arranged displays of sprouts and organically grown root vegetables, greeted only by their worst nightmare. Forget the buzz of gooey kale smoothies, it would be the sound of defensive yelps and frantic itching all day long. As I dug into the dirt, I couldn't shake that delightful, rebellious glee. "What's Karen going to do?" I cackled to myself, losing track of the disappearing morning light. "Send out a memo warning everyone about high-risk booth zones? Maybe she'll post a mandatory no-scratching sign." In between shovels full of earth, I could already mock Karen in my mind as she dashed from booth to booth, too polished to comprehend the greenery, or the itching rash that would soon be her agony. I imagined watching her meticulously plan her conversations with the farmers, only to find each booth a battlefield of prickly plants. Even Terry's laughter added to my soundtrack. Every chuckle was a reminder of our ultimate show of defiance against this petty oppression. Finally, with each pesky seed tucked into its new home, I stepped back to admire my handiwork in the early evening glow. It felt as if I had choreographed my very own Broadway production of the Great Poison Ivy Market. A grand spectacle ready to unfold before all the sweet but slightly dim-witted residents of Maple Crest. My palms itched with glee. No, itching was definitely just around the corner, and I was about to be the mastermind behind an uproarious flap of humor. Oh, the sweet satisfaction at the thought of unprovided horticulture making waves as vendor complaints rolled in. Would the glorious Eat Local slogan be replaced with a frantic, avoid at all costs? The irony tickled me endlessly. Tomorrow, my friends, would be a show to remember. The setup was complete, but now came the waiting game, where patience isn't just a virtue but a stratagem in planting chaos. How would Karen respond when the chaos of these wild plants unfolded before her carefully structured facade? Would she view my little rebellion as an amateur hobby gone too far, or become her own personal nightmare? My heart thrummed with excitement as I envisioned the chaos to come. As dawn broke over Maple Crest the following morning, I felt an electric surge of anticipation tinged with mischief. The farmer's market was set to open at 9, and my brain buzzed with the possibilities of the impending chaos. I leaned against my porch railing, coffee in hand, surveying the early setup like a gleeful overseer of an amusement park. Tents were flapping in the gentle breeze, and vendors were anxiously arranging their artisanal honey and organic cucumber displays, blissfully unaware of the botanical minefield lurking beneath their feet. Each respectful nod of a neighbor moved like a soundtrack to a tragedy awaiting its dramatic reveal. The farmer's market opened, and I was practically vibrating with delight. Let the games begin. I watched from my porch, hidden behind the shrubbery I lovingly tended to. My heart raced at the thought of the sweet revenge soon unraveling in the scene below. The first vendor, a chipper woman with hair like an unkempt scarecrow, cheerfully laid down her spread of produce, oblivious to the sneaky green anarchists nestled below. As she enthusiastically invited passers-by to sample her kale dips, I imagined how the poison ivy would soon react, itching to be noticed by those unsuspecting souls. A high-pitched squeal or two wouldn't just tickle my fancy. It would be the orchestra music to my mischievous symphony. "Ooh, you're going to love it," I whispered under my breath, imaging both enjoyment and discomfort mixed into a salad of pure comedic joy. Then came old Mr. Thompson, whose love for tomatoes was only rivaled by his disdain for anything out of the ordinary. He piled his wares high, making sure every cherry tomato shone like it had just been polished for a gala. "Organic and homegrown, folks. Nothing beats it," he called out, waving carelessly while stepping haplessly into the clutches of my devious plot. I nearly choked on my coffee as I envisioned him, frantically flailing and scratching at spots he never knew could itch. If only he knew that each ruby-hued fruit was now overshadowed by nature's very own prankster hiding just a foot below. Could a simple tomato ever instill greater anguish than poison ivy? Apparently, I was about to find out. Just then, an overzealous mom with a toddler in tow shuffled by my doorway, carrying a mesh bag overflowing with organic carrots. "Timmy, look at the lovely farmer's market," she beamed, pointing at an adorable basket filled with super healthy-looking endive. I stifled a laugh as I anticipated her delight transforming into further chaos. Suddenly, Timmy, in one awestruck motion, connected with the prickly vines, leaving me in stitches watching the unfolding debacle unravel. The delightful little munchkin would soon discover the joys of little green bursts of mayhem. "Ha! Keep the carrots, Timmy. The itch will be your party favor." My chuckles morphed into cackles, a scene in my mind where I would relish the laughter of delighted passengers on the amusement park train as their itcheroo filled our neighborhood air. As the sun climbed higher, feeling both amused and surprisingly empowered, I chatted with Terry, who had come over with a basket of homegrown strawberries strapped to his arm. "Hey, think this farm-fresh produce will help ease the itch?" he quipped, pointing toward the market like the fantastic comrade in crime he was. "Just don't forget to sprinkle in some of my happy strawberries between the kale bushes. We'll call it the Itchy Itch Salad." Terry laughed, and the image spiraled in front of my eyes, a general store of the absurd, where the illusion of healthy living crumbled like day-old bread amidst a backyard brawl with nature's little teases. Could working together against this oppressive HOA be the most delightful bonding activity ever? Maybe I should launch Rebellion Mondays for my fellow neighbors to participate, free lattes and poisoned ivy teas included. The highlight came when Karen, perfectly manicured and so oblivious it was laughable, made her grand entrance. Dressed in a pastel power suit that could probably cut glass, she approached the central information booth with an air of superiority that could lift the heaviest weights. "Everyone, we've hosted quite the market today," she announced, her fake smile rivaling those on toothpaste commercials. Little did she know, the revelry of chaos wrapped deeply beneath her regal poise would unravel any minute. My lips curled into a smirk as I recalled her earlier comment about integrating community spirit, completely disregarding my existence while overshadowing my domain. To see her face scrunch up in bewilderment as something feisty sprouted its way to the foreground was like poetry, only infinitely more enjoyable. And then, just as I imagined, a frenzy erupted. "Hey! What the ow?" Mr. Thompson's anguished yelp echoed like a proud anthem across the lot as the first wave of hitchhikers swarmed to attention, the people one by one discovering the unsolicited rash of reality. Most wore expressions of disbelief that said, "This can't be actualized," and my heart sang like I was witnessing Cirque du Soleil's most dramatic performance. I could hear laughter bubbling up inside me, as if I had struck gold in a treasure hunt against the HOA that day. Victory was sweet, my friends, and the universe had delivered a masterpiece I could never have painted myself. With a delighted grin and an obnoxious twinkle in my eye, I mused to myself, had I just inadvertently crafted chaos into the arts of rebellion? Why not transform the mundane into uproarious tribulations? What was community spirit without a bit of creative chaos? The sheer absurdity of it all was invigorating. Will they invade my garden again? Only if they can find their way through this garden of mischief wrapped in ivy. Vine after ivy-clad vine, tomorrow was a festival worth celebrating, and perhaps an HOA ponderance on more practical regulations would be on the horizon. Are they ready to meet a true renegade of Maple Crest? A small part of me hoped they would never look at fresh produce the same way again. As the chaos erupted, I couldn't help but feel like a giddy conductor orchestrating the finest farce that Maple Crest had ever witnessed. The sound of Mr. Thompson's anguished holler rippled through the crowd like an electric wave, punctuated by the frantic rustling of skirts and the shocked gasps of bewildered patrons. It was pure gold. I leaned back against my porch railing, reveling in the cacophony and embracing the carnivalesque atmosphere. Just the sight of Karen, mistaking her pastel cape for authority, marching around like a startled hen, only added to my amusement. Her meticulously styled hair, once so stiff, now seemed to frizz with every "What is happening?" she shouted. Who knew revenge could be this entertaining? It was like watching my favorite soap opera episode unfold live. Amid the disarray, I spotted Ginger, an insufferably loud vendor, draped in a tie-dye apron, her hands flailing expressively as she recounted her tragic misfortune to anyone willing to lend an ear. And then I went to grab some syrup for my waffles. Ow, what is this? Her voice, a cartoonish drawn-out note, echoed through the market, sending the disenchanted masses into even deeper disarray. She had yanked a hapless customer over, waving her arms like she was conducting an orchestra of complaints, while the poor soul stood there, red-faced and bewildered. I must admit, imagining the world's loudest vendor preening her ego while trying to identify a rash on her perfectly manicured hands was the cherry on top of my chaotic Sunday. If only I had popcorn to snack on. Just as the focus shifted back to Karen, whose eyes darted around in aggrieved disbelief, an HOA board member stepped in, clipboard clamped to his chest like a lifeboat on a sinking ship. He was clearly out of his depth. With every itch and scratch echoing through the throng, he struggled to re-establish control while juggling complaints like they were fiery torches. Okay everyone, let's, settle down. It's just a little contact dermatitis, he stammered, and I nearly dropped my coffee. Contact dermatitis? This was a full-blown ivy invasion, and he had the gall to spin it as a casual skin condition. I shot a wink at Terry, who was doubled over at my side, gasping for air between fits of laughter. As if a new type of chickenpox had just taken the market by storm, we were all in on the cosmic joke. Who knew what chaos a little plant could sow? Would this average Saturday become the stuff of legend? In that moment of glorious absurdity, my thoughts turned toward the neighbors who rallied against the heat of Karen's wrath. Among the frenzy, I spotted a few familiar faces peeking from behind the tomato stands, their expressions a mix of flabbergasted amusement and deliberate defiance. It dawned on me that perhaps my mischievous nature had sparked something beyond a mere market disaster. Had I unwittingly ignited a revolution against the HOA? Perhaps the whispers I'd heard about how Karen wanted to transform our community into a sterile paradise of conformity would finally meet their match. I could almost hear the chants in my head. Down with the HOA, up with poison ivy. The sheer imagination of it was peppered with allure, and it made me wonder how long my reign as the neighborhood outlier could continue. Surely there was enough botanical chaos to fuel the fire. I had no way of knowing how this little venture would reshape our neat little suburban utopia, but I reveled in that delicious uncertainty. Purposely planting poison ivy for such a cause? Nah, that was just me exercising my creative freedom against their shallow ideals. If they think they can domineer my garden, they've met their match in the most ironic way possible, I mused smugly, adjusting my messy bun as a wave of empowerment washed over me. Perhaps Jessica, the yoga instructor who lived 2 doors down, was correct all along. We were one with nature, only now nature was giving us what the HOA refused to acknowledge. The sight of Karen marching through her own disaster made my creative juices flow. Maybe I should start a blog titled Gardening with a Twist, or Nature's Little Mischiefs. Wouldn't that be fitting for an artist reveling in the absurd? With each cringe-worthy encounter echoing through the market, I couldn't help but mentally applaud my own handiwork. Even the toddler I had spotted earlier was now tugging at his mom's skirt, his innocent finger pointing inquisitively at the gawping adults. "Mommy, my arm itches too," he declared, pointing to the pockmarked rash, turning his little limb into something resembling a spotted giraffe. What a sight! Was this a family event? That could be a memorable art piece titled "A Saturday at the Farmer's Market," I chuckled, envisioning a gallery installation showcasing the real-life reactions of innocent bystanders to my diabolical prank. As the hour ticked onward, with rashes multiplying and voices rising higher, I felt, as well as saw, the energy in the neighborhood shift. Evoking laughter in the face of adversity and igniting solidarity against the boring regulations of our HOA birthed an unlikely camaraderie. Terry threw his arm around me, giving me an enthusiastic victory shake as if I had single-handedly defeated the forces of uptight suburbanity. "Hey, Megan, I'd say you've put the fun in dysfunction today. Maybe you should lead the charge every Saturday," he joked, gesturing to the frenzy unfolding in front of us. Sure, I was creating a scene, but perhaps the scene had become the beauty. Maybe we would just use this day to celebrate our quirky community spirit. I couldn't wait to imagine what glorious outcomes my rebellion could inspire. With anticipation tingling in the air, I wondered, what would happen at the next market? Surely the clutches of fate and my botanical witticism could lead us down even quirkier paths. Just when I thought nothing could possibly top the sight of Karen's pastel suit flailing in frustration, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. The potential for a full-blown uprising. I dashed to the clearing by the veggie stand, my heart racing as I watched Terry rally the small crowd, their faces a mosaic of bemusement and delight. It was a scene straight out of a folk festival, albeit with a slightly higher risk of poison ivy itch. Terry, with his plaid shirt and denim overalls, pulled off the role of charismatic leader exceedingly well, brandishing a zucchini like a baton in a marching band. "Folks, we've got a food fight, but with a twist. No food. Just colorful rash patterns and unmet expectations," he bellowed, causing a ripple of laughter that reverberated through the chaos. "Ah, Terry, you were the perfect foil to my chaotic antics." As the war cry for democracy in Maple Crest took shape, Karen's incensed voice sliced through the air. "This is unacceptable," she screeched, regaining her footing as her hyperventilating breaths quickened like an upset goldfish splashing in its bowl. "How will I explain this at the next HOA meeting?" I would bet my prized rosemary plant that she was already calculating the number of PowerPoints needed to convince the board that her community's descent into botanical madness was somehow everyone else's fault. I couldn't help but chuckle at the mental image of her desperately trying to spin a disaster into a scripted narrative, with complaints and blame ricocheting off her immaculate hair as if it were a shield of entitlement. I envisioned the anguish on her face when she realized she was losing control, not of the market, but of her extraordinary hold over this little slice of suburbia. But it wasn't just Karen and her clipboard that caught my attention. There was a gentle but determined voice breaking through the chaos. Brenda, from across the street, creator of the high-class book club, was now flexing her nonfiction muscles into activism. "We demand answers," she declared, brandishing a potted plant plucked from her own patio, a peaceful countermeasure against the mayhem. The audacity of it struck me as utterly glorious. "Are we just going to stand by while Karen tries to put a restraining order on nature?" she continued, her passion fueled not by control, but a desire for community spirit. This was the stuff of legends, a neighborhood uniting over poison ivy, defiance, and a craving for actual liveliness. The market transformed, becoming a satire of itself, the once monotonous color palette of the stalls now a riotous carnival of organic chaos and nostalgia. I meandered through the frenzy like a rogue minstrel, sipping from my coffee, and dear reader, it was like I was at my own gallery opening. Scrawls of "We Nature" formed makeshift banners, and the scratchy murmurs of disgruntled yet satisfied vendors blended harmoniously into an artisanal soundtrack of the absurd. Every irritated shout layered brilliantly over the whimsical tones of Terry's planted puns, echoing his laugh lyrics against the chaotic backdrop. The newfound camaraderie was palpable as even the initially disgruntled vendors seemed to find humor in their predicament. Just minutes ago, they were destined for doom, and now they were zoo animals in an unexpected safari. As I joined in the revelry, my giddiness felt like a delicious kind of sweetened revenge against those who dared challenge my right to enjoy my property and garden. I could almost hear the sweet whispers of my plants cheering me on in their botanical tongues, or perhaps that was simply my imagination running wild with optimism. This was a shining moment where the introverted artist transformed into an avenger, a mix of a rebel yell and a cheerful riot. Who knew all it took to shake up Maple Crest was a hint of ivy, a sprinkle of rebellion, and a dash of community spirit? I wouldn't dare say I'd orchestrated a revolution, but this silent uprising certainly had potential. The cheers erupting around me felt like a collective release. Just as I stood there soaking in the essence of this delightful anarchy, another shockwave of hilarity unfolded before my eyes. The toddler with the spotted arm was now leading a small band of children, arms linked like tiny warriors, bringing forth their battle against the perils of weed-infested burgers and poison ivy ice cream. It was utterly ridiculous, and yet it was a real testament to how ludicrous life could become when faced with the establishment's oppressive procedures. "Charge! Against the HOA and into the great unknown," they shouted, their innocence granting a perfect comic relief that had everyone in stitches. I expected Karen to either faint from the sight or unleash an even more absurd countermeasure, perhaps declaring a state of emergency over the loss of rationality in her civilized domain. Amidst the laughter, I found myself deeply reflective. This little market, initially intended as a reminder of controllable rhythms of suburban life, had somehow provoked an awakening. As I scanned the joyful faces, I realized there was potential here. The energy was alive. Whatever the fallout, people were learning to laugh in the face of conformity, rediscovering their connections through vibrant exchanges of humor and camaraderie. I only hope the community spirit ignited today wouldn't fizzle into mere nostalgic moments by next weekend. Would the balance of power finally tilt from potluck committees and the snooty HOA to something inherent and wild? I was ready to embrace every blooming challenge. How could I possibly harness this positivity for future chaos? As I stood at the center of the chaos, grinning like a Cheshire cat, I couldn't help but feel the rush of satisfaction coursing through my veins. It almost matched the pleasant burn from the ivy that I had planted with strategic precision. The sheer absurdity of it all sent ripples of laughter through the crowd, including Karen, who bolted from booth to booth, attempting to restore order while dodging the curious little hands of children wielding herbal battle shields. Image this: a woman so accustomed to having her way, brought to her knees by a horde of carefree toddlers. The chaos felt electrifying. I was borderline giddy, realizing this was more than just a community disruption. It was a mass awakening against the suburban suffocation brought on by the HOA, an uprising punctuated by innocence and humor. Terry, bless his plaid-clad heart, wasn't just spectating, he jumped right into the fray, rallying folks with exaggerated gestures that highlighted every quirk of our predicament. "This is the protest of the year," he proclaimed, lunging forward to hand out organic cucumbers, as if they were a currency in this uproarious economy of rebellion. "Take these! They have magical powers!" Who knew the trick to vanquishing oppressive regulations was not through legal threats and articles of association, but by embracing playful chaos? Terry's jovial attempts to rationalize the madness complemented my artistic vision perfectly. Who would have thought that fresh veggies would become the revolutionary effigies of our quest for freedom? I raised my coffee in salute, amazed at how this simple, spiraled incident veered into a zany celebration of life over property regulations. Then came the moment that would seal the fate of our escapade. One of the children, charged with the spirit of this absurd protest, swung a plastic broomstick with the zeal of a knight on a quest to liberate the castle. "For freedom!" he yelled. And of course, with the impeccable timing of fate, the broomstick caught the edge of Karen's pristine clipboard and sent it sailing through the air. Papers fluttered like confused butterflies, landing in the arms of everyone around while she stood frozen in disbelief, a pastel fortress crumbling in real time. Is this the kind of chaos that brings me joy? It definitely was, and the sight was so comical, I was in actual danger of spilling my precious caffeine. I couldn't help but let out a roar of laughter, which only fueled the merry mayhem further. In the aftermath of that glorious moment, a remarkable shift transpired within the attendees. Neighbors whom I'd only exchanged hellos with suddenly transformed into partners in crime against the oppressive grandeur of our HOA. Brenda, now adorned with makeshift ivy leaves crowned on her head like a warrior's headdress, epitomized the spirit of our gathering. "We are the denizens of diversity," she bellowed, cheeks flushed with defiance and exhilaration. At that instant, we weren't just a community tethered by zoning laws. We were a collective chorus singing in liberating tones that echoed petrichor, nature's own perfume. Suddenly, gossip and conformity morphed into laughter streams that weaved our lives together into something more delightful. Peeking into the neighborhood Facebook group later that evening, I was greeted by a digital onslaught filled with accusations and chaos. Who allowed poison ivy to run rampant at the market? A neighbor quipped with a hilarious meme of a furious Karen stomping her pastel heels. But rather than igniting fear, the threads blossomed into a tapestry of camaraderie as tales of rashes and itch-free remedies were swapped like badges of honor. Communities bonded through shared absurdity. Imagine that. It rather felt like a support group for misfits who had tasted the bittersweet fruit of rebellion. The comment section lit up like it was the 4th of July, and I mused over how long Karen could resist the reality check that was being thrust upon her like a wildlife documentary gone rouge. Amidst the digital chaos, I felt a tinge of responsibility coil around my heart. Was it still fair to poke fun at Karen now that the tables had turned? I couldn't help but file away thoughts of revenge as the laughter simmered down. Could this be the spark that ignited a newfound sense of home among us? What if this vibrant uprising wasn't just a fleeting adventure but could elevate our little Maple Crest into a hub of authenticity, a community embracing nature over manicured lawns? The more I pondered, the more the idea grew, wrapping around my mind like ivy itself. A community garden, our shared sanctuary, blooming with all the colors disregarded by HOA regulations to keep things tasteful. All it would take was a little help, maybe recruiting Terry and Brenda. The possibilities began to spiral out before me, and a whimsical notion struck as I pictured colorful vegetables growing alongside wildflowers, blossoming a beautiful rebellion against conformity. Perhaps we could meet every week as a neighborhood, synthesizing our powers into one shared vision, breaking down walls brick by brick. Drew from the knitting club could host crochet workshops, while someone else might offer herbal first aid training. I was abruptly drawn from my daydreams by the sound of raucous giggling, the band of kids, now empowered mini-activists, sporting their own ivy crowns, likely up to yet another riotous endeavor. Wouldn't it be the icing on the cake if we transformed our notoriety into societal nourishment? With visions of fresh tomatoes capturing the essence of liberation dancing in my mind, I realized this bonkers market, with all its delightful chaos, might become our platform for change. Why stop at a simple local protest? One thought gave birth to another. A proper gathering, a celebration with farmer booths, cooking demos, and perhaps a cheeky informal HOA debate outside. I could clearly see our yard transformed into a whimsical wonderland, and even Karen, worn out from her snooty reign, could tap into a bit of enjoyable reprieve. The laughter, rebellion against petty limitations, and delightful chaos all coiling together were far from over. What would she have to say about that? I couldn't wait to find out. The vibrant chaos and unexpected connections teased a tantalizing hope for a shift towards something more alive in Maple Crest. Or was it simply a whimsical daydream? The irony of the day was indelibly etched upon my heart as I watched the neighborhood swirl into something vibrant, magnificent, and inconceivably joyful, reminding me that even the wildest ideas for rebellion could bear wonderful fruit. What would our next adventure hold? As the neighborhood transformed around me, I could feel the energy of rebellion crackling like the 4th of July, infused with the intoxicating smell of the fresh veggies Terry was unhitching from his ancient pickup. Laughter bounced around as impromptu games broke out, with kids chasing one another through the thriving gardens, hands sticky with organic produce. I couldn't help but grin as I watched one little boy, proudly sporting a cucumber like a sword, no doubt the valiant leader of this mini-revolution. My heart swelled at the sight of my neighbors bonding over the absurdity of Karen's plans, suddenly united in this absurd grocery cart bonanza of joy. The poison ivy stood heroic in its approved booths, notorious but deserving of bouquets for its role in bringing our eclectic crew together in this fleeting moment. Was it possible that my own petard hoisting against the HOA was morphing Maple Crest into a paradise of quirk? Amidst the vegetative action-packed festivities, I spotted Karen, on the fringe, her perfectly coiffed hair fraying at the ends as if summoning the very gods of havoc. I couldn't help but chuckle, savoring the sight of our HOA president looking like she'd just stepped out of a quaint sitcom episode gone wrong, trying to hold on to a shattering control that seemed to dissipate with every bout of giggles surrounding the makeshift market. She was no longer conducting a symphony. She was now drowning in a circus of misfit aromas, smushed tomatoes, and children darting around her like crazed fireflies. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. It was as if I could hear the pathetic wail of her clipboard's ghost as it floated through the air with all the grace of a deflated balloon. What delicious irony! The very reigning queen of conformist oppression had become a mere jester in the grand spectacle of our uprising. Would she dare confront me directly amidst this chaos? Sure enough, there she was, marching straight toward me like a businesswoman armed with flowcharts and bad intentions. The fiery glint in her eyes hinted that our hilarious skirmish was about to elevate into something far less amusing, yet the anticipation felt electrifying. I braced myself for her stern complaint. After all, she wasn't one to back down from a confrontation, especially one sparked by her lavender-scented nightmares of disobedience. "Megan Caldwell!" she spluttered, finger thrusting towards me like an accusation taking flight. "What on earth do you think you are doing? This is not a carnival. This is a farmer's market." Her incredulous declaration fell flat against the backdrop of laughter and chaos, as if she were trying to extinguish a bonfire with a cup of lukewarm tea. The urge to retort with a witty quip bubbled within me, but instead, I feigned an expression of utmost concern, clutching my oversized, eco-friendly coffee mug as if it contained valuable hints to the universe. "Oh, Karen, but have you considered the joys of community growth? I can hardly blame the charm of poison ivy for blossoming into our vibrant discussion. It's practically an invitation to connect." I punctuated my statement with a dramatic flourish, waving my mug about like a scepter. It was the perfect mix of sarcasm and genuine belief in the beauty of unorthodox. While she sputtered, searching for words that would ever so gracefully elevate her dictatorial manifesto, I saw the spark of agitation swirl in her eyes, as if she'd bitten into a sour lemon. And dear reader, nothing was quite as satisfying. Feeling energized by the chaos, I rallied everyone around me, drawing in onlookers as if I were the queen of a not-so-distant realm. "Ladies and gentlemen of Maple Crest," I declared with all the bravado of a medieval bard, "today, we celebrate our bountiful yearnings toward wholesome, wild joy versus stifled suburban conformity." A cheer erupted, surrounded by a wild burst of claps and hoots. The atmosphere pulsed with excitement, and for a fleeting moment, we were not the checkboxes of Karen's HOA. We were a raucous gallery of individuals unified by our wild imaginations running free. What was an ordinary Saturday morning morphed into a festival akin to a marriage between Woodstock and the garden section of Home Depot. Karen's face, a striking shade of crimson, was the perfect glimpse into the stark contrast between her unyielding control and the spontaneous freedom of our blooming rebellion. With a wretched glare, she attempted to assert herself once more, tossing out accusations of disorder into the energetic atmosphere. But the crowd, emboldened by our newfound identity, began to chant, "More ivy! More laughter!" It was the glorious sound of defiance, and undeniably glorious. Who wouldn't want the robust chaos of ivy mingling with the juice of fresh cucumbers? With Terry cheering alongside me, waving his arms as if casting a spell of good vibes, I felt an intoxicating wave of exhilaration crashing over me. We were on the precipice of cultivating something extraordinary. Was this simply an uproarious distraction, or could we channel this admissible anarchy into a lasting movement for change? As Karen stood there, visibly withering under a barrage of organic tomatoes whizzing past her head, I felt the foundations of a community rooting fiercely in the soil of rebellion. Laughter intertwined with determination, igniting an ineffable spark within us all. After the laughter subsided, I noticed her visibly defeated energy gradually shift into a whisper of curiosity, the very emotion born from the prospect of intersectionality within our community instead of the monotony of her tyrannical rule. Perhaps I had successfully planted seeds of rebellion that would bear fruit not just in this chaotic uproar but beyond, into a new adventure, a community garden that embraced the very vibrancy and authenticity Karen could never appreciate. The bright cherry tomatoes and whimsical flowers would rise as legacies of our shared wild nature. What had begun as a simple act of defiance could morph into something truly beautiful. It would only take our whimsical visions fusing with the immersive potential of our neighbors to transform Maple Crest into a haven of authenticity, right? As my triumphant rally gained momentum, I felt like a conductor orchestrating a long-overdue symphony of spontaneity against the stark, nonsense RHYFM of Karen's rules. "More ivies, more laughter," the crowd chanted, and honestly, it felt like we were summoning a raucous folk spirit that had lingered too long in the corners of Maple Crest. The air thickened with the scent of tomatoes and fresh earth, but it was no match for the bitterness radiating from our passionate HOA president. She was watching our joyful rebellion unravel like cheap fabric, and boy did it fill my heart with glee. The normally stoic garden seemed to giggle with delight as if chuckling at her futile attempts to regain control. The notion that lush prickly plants could end our HOA reign was as ridiculous as Karen, strutting about in her pastel pantsuit, believing it could intimidate the blister of creativity bursting forth from our little neighborhood. With each passing moment of Karen floundering around like a fish out of water, The absurdity of the situation spiraled into a comedic fever dream. I noticed whispers and giggles spreading through the crowd like wildfire as our neighbors circled her like a flock of amused seagulls. I could practically hear neighborhood bingo nights being rewritten as "A Day with the Poison Ivy Brigade." The households that Karen believed she was molding into perfect replicas began to bask in their newfound squirmy identity. The free spirits of Maple Crest boldly acknowledged the invitation of nature. Suddenly, everyone wanted to join in on the mayhem. Terry concocted his signature experimental tomato juice for the brave souls brave enough to savor Karen's downfall, while the kids began smearing poison ivy paint on one another playfully, their giggles echoing through the vibrant gardens. This was folklore in the making, the kind they would one day narrate to children, turning our rebellion into whimsical legend. Yet among all the laughter, it was Karen's stubborn angst that shone brighter than her meticulous planner. "You've unleashed chaos," she screeched, as if chaos had revealed itself from beneath her clipboard like a genie, ready to grant wishes of torment. I shot a quick glance at her, feeling not even a smidgen of remorse for her suffering, as I carefully placed my hand over my heart, pretending to feel bad. "Oh dear Karen, chaos was already here, just camouflaged beneath your unwavering rules," I chirped back, trying to maintain the rhythm of wit without losing my footing in the laughter. The whole situation was a prime example of planting your feet firmly in your moral convictions, even when faced with the threat of a clipboard-wielding tyrant. My mind raced with the delicious thought of pointing out the invasion of her habits, ironically echoing those very laws she tried to impose on us with such fervor. "Do you honestly think this frenzy is appropriate?" she continued to bluster, tossing her hair as if it would vault her back into power with each dramatic flip. I could barely stifle a guffaw watching her, adorned in her tailored pastels, desperately trying to prevent the inevitable facade from crumbling. As her voice rose in pitch, the crowd responded with matching enthusiasm. More chaos, echoing in a matured crescendo. It became an amusing catchphrase, a mantra of liberation, as the former constraints of Maple Crest unraveled. I could see my neighbors taking pride in this jubilant mayhem, relishing the irony of Karen's attempt to exert control over what was undeniably out of her grasp. The poison ivy had bloomed into this living testament of defiance, sprouting from the very earth she presumed to tame. I couldn't help but guffaw at how spectacularly her authoritarian vision was reaching the classical depths of folly. The laughter twinkled through our backyard social, harmonizing with the rustling leaves, while Karen continued her futile tirade, seemingly oblivious to the delightful camaraderie blooming around her. I leaned in conspiratorially, inviting our crowd's attention once more. "Who would like to brainstorm next year's community festival?" I called, gallantly waving my humid, now tomato-smeared coffee mug as though it were a sword of freedom. "How about a DIY itch cream contest? Think of the charm. Competition could take it by storm." The crowd erupted with cheers, their anticipation igniting in radiant laughter and playful ideas dancing throughout the afternoon. With each excited shout came the sweet aroma of organic freedom, melded into our daily lives, a blessed intersection of creativity and shared definitions of joy far beyond Karen's rigid imagination. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in a honey-glazed shade, I surveyed the landscape of joyful rebellion that had overtaken our neighborhood. There was an undeniable magic in the air, children dashing about, neighbors exclaiming absurd ideas and crafting plans that would keep this silliness going. And here we stood, united against the repressive red tape morality that Karen wielded like a sadistic wand. The whispered lore of our triumphant garden revolution began to forge a tapestry of resilience, the glorious tale of how a band of unlikely rebels turned a farmer's market into a glorious riot of joyful absurdity. It was clear that I had sparked something that transcended the petty entitlement of an HOA president to an awakening of neighborly spirit. The longing for authenticity sprouted even in the most backbone-loving of our community. Was freedom truly blooming in Maple Crest? This infusion of excitement and shared aspirations amidst a single act of defiance against her absurd control structure made the everyday community pulse with life again, and I had a feeling that everyone who participated would cherish this unorthodox chapter forever.